okay? All right, so today we're going to talk about nourishing the caregiver, okay? So I did a training about a year ago, and it was grocery saving strategies, and I'm going to send that to anyone who's interested as kind of a companion piece or companion component to this. That training has a lot of just practical, this is how you save money at the grocery store tips. And this one is going to be more about mindset. Okay, it's going to be more about focusing on what's really important and also throwing in a little bit of neurobiology and how our nervous system responds to sensation and food in general. Okay, so if you have any questions as we go, please feel free to add them into the chat. If you have any comments, please do that as well. And I really love to get your feedback on this. So again, if you're interested in doing that post survey, please put your email address in the chat, okay? So we're going to talk about feeding both the body and the spirit today, even when our energy and our money and our time and all of our resources are really depleted. I know this time of year is where we really start gearing up to probably spend more than we should, socialize more than we normally do. There's a lot of traditions, a lot of expectations, and even if you're at the very beginning of your caregiving journey, it can still be a lot to try to juggle all of the things that you now have to do that maybe you didn't have to do last year on top of keeping traditions alive. And that can be very, very stressful to try to find that balance. And then for those of you who've been in the trenches for years, you understand that there are just some things that you can't do anymore. And that's okay, right? We're going to try to focus on what we have and what we can do and less on the changes or the lack that maybe we're experiencing now, okay? So food is one of the few daily rituals that we can really shape, right? Everybody has to eat and you have to eat every day. But think of each meal as like chemistry, right? And culture and comfort, right? All wrapped up in one act. Okay, so we're going to explore a little bit today how to make food stretch a little further, right? While still feeling like an act of love, right? An act of care. We're going to try to keep our kitchens practical and sacred. Okay, so I'm excited to share this with you. Let's keep going. So, we know that there are a lot of uncertainties when it comes to our resources lately, right? There are delays, there are gaps in our safety nets, there's a lot of uncertainty. Even if you are not personally impacted by the market fluctuations we're all experiencing, we can definitely get into a financial hole during this time of year, right? With, again, all the expectations, gift giving, food, all that stuff, travel, maybe even. Okay, so this is a time of year, regardless of your financial or emotional reserves that you may or may not have. This is a very stressful time for all of us, okay? So I really want to just validate you all today and say that I know that the struggle is real. Okay. I myself am a mother of 5, and so feeding a family of 7 is incredibly difficult. And so I can definitely relate to some of the stresses that come with this time of year, right? A lot of us are adjusting to bigger responsibilities, smaller budgets, maybe prices are rising. These are all real pressures, right? These are things that we feel like, I'm already kind of on the edge and I'm feeling just tapped a little bit closer to falling over every day, right? So today isn't about some sort of perfect meal plan or perfect solution, right? We're just trying to be realistic, okay? Realistic about the care that we are providing for our loved ones and also the care we are turning back onto ourselves, okay? Because as you know, caring for you is caring for them, okay? So we have to be compassionate externally, outwardly, right? And also inwardly, right? And I would argue that the inward compassion is where the external compassion really grows, right? Because if you don't have that self-compassion, your compassion's incomplete, right? So we're going to talk a little bit today about balancing practical, right? What goes into the pantry, and also soulful, what goes into the heart, okay? So there's a lot of research on caregiver stress, that has taken place over the years. And that research shows that chronic stress, whether it's caregiving or otherwise, actually dulls the appetite and can change the way we perceive taste, which I didn't know that. I thought was pretty interesting. So this is why even food choices can kind of seem a little heavy, right? Just kind of like one more thing I have to figure out. We can experience a lot of like decision fatigue, right? It's like, oh my gosh, you know, my kids have to eat every day. Have to make dinner again, right? So I really want to encourage you that you can reclaim joy in eating and not have it feel like you're indulging, right? It's just part of how we manage and maintain our nervous system, okay? Food is a great comfort to a lot of us because it is a basic need, right? Everything on this planet, unless you're a rock, is going to eat, right? And so our nervous system responds to food. Okay, it responds to just the act of chewing and swallowing can cause your nervous system to relax. Okay, which is why oftentimes when we're stressed, we stress eat, right? We grab that pack of Lay's or we grab that, you know, piece of cake or whatever ever at the office because it feels good, right? It gives us a lot of fun neurotransmitters in our brain, right? And so we have to be, of course, mindful of what we're putting in our bodies, but also understand that there is a biological component to eating, not only just to nourish our bodies, but to help repair our nervous systems. And so we're going to dive into that a little bit today. So I want you to think just either, you know, in your mind, or you can even add it into the chat. Um, think of one food that brings you joy and comfort when things get tight, right? What's one thing that you know for sure is going to make you feel comforted? Now, I'll give my own example. The other day, your girl was on the struggle bus. Okay, I was feeling like I had too many things coming at me at once, and I was really stressed out. And I typically don't stress eat, but man, I was craving some fried chicken and mashed potatoes. And so that's what I did. I made myself some. Well, I made everybody, but it's really just for me. I made myself some fried chicken and mashed potatoes. And it was something that I didn't feel guilty about eating, even though I have high cholesterol. I still ate that fried chicken like I didn't um, because it was a comfort, right? It was a comfort food for me. And we've got somebody in the chat saying Coca-Cola. Yes, Coca-Cola. Actually have a coworker who you cannot see her without one in her hand, right? Coffee or hot tea. Yes, yes. There's that sensation of something warm can be incredibly soothing. All right, great. So let's go on to the next one. So the caregiver's kitchen reality. Okay, so if you all are like me, which I'm sure you are, because we're all human beings on this chat, if you are taking care of people all day, especially if you're a working caregiver, right? So you've got your day job and then you come home and you start your second shift of caregiving, right? Or you've been caregiving all day long because your loved one has a lot of high needs. Having to cook at the end of that, ugh, right? It's just one more thing, right? So there's a lot of fatigue that plays into the scenarios here, right? Plays into the story. Sometimes you don't have time to cook, right? If you're getting off the clock at 5 o'clock and you come home by, you know, six o'clock, and then you got to take another hour and a half to, you know, maybe tidy up your kitchen and prepare and all that stuff. I mean, that's a lot of time that goes into feeding your families, right? And then some of you have loved ones who have very unpredictable appetites, right? I know my children, they have food aversions that can just turn on a dime, right? One day they cannot get enough frozen egg rolls, and so we stock our freezer, and then the next day they're like, I don't like those anymore, right? So that does happen, right? Where you have to kind of pivot, and that all takes energy, right? That's all labor. But it's all love at the same time, right? So we can always keep that in our back pocket. But studies show that caregivers are often preparing fewer balanced meals. And it's not because you're neglectful, it's just because you're exhausted, right? And your energy level is going to shape how you prioritize things, okay? So if this sounds like you, I really want to encourage you. If you're feeling guilty about that, please try to inject a little self-compassion in that space, okay? Because you're not the only one, okay? It is very common for people who are exhausted to reach for something that's easy. Okay. That's just normal human behavior. So don't beat yourself up if you're, maybe not creating the Martha Stewart meal that you wish you could create every day. Okay. That's not what, I'm not trying to guilt anybody for that. All right. So let's try to look at some ways to simplify our pantries and our meals without sacrificing the nourishment. Okay. Because we're not trying to be gourmet cooks here, right? We're just trying to inject a little bit of grace into our routine, right? And when I say that, I mean giving ourselves some grace, right? Cutting ourselves some slack. We are doing the best we can, and we are doing enough within that space, okay? I promise you that. So, another reflection. What's been the hardest part of cooking lately, right? That's where we start the repair. What's the hardest part about cooking lately? Is it time? Is it energy? Is it you just can't think of what to do because you're so burnt out now? Is it finances, right? Resources? There's a lot of things that can keep us um, not excited about getting into the kitchen every day, right? And some people love to cook and some people don't. I don't really like to cook, but I like the way my food tastes. So I cook because I have a taste preference, but it's not something I enjoy doing, right? So that also can play into our enthusiasm of getting into the kitchen, right? All right. So now we're going to talk a little about mindset. Now, I am a huge, huge, huge supporter of catching those sticky thoughts that we like to ruminate on, those things that tell us what we should be doing and how we should be behaving and how we're not doing everything right, and reframing it, right? Because the way we interpret or way we translate information to ourselves is huge in keeping us above sea level when it comes to the inundation of caregiving duties, right? So language is chemistry, okay? When we think, it's going to translate into a neurochemical response, okay? So what do I mean by that? I mean, if you say, I'm scraping by, your brain hears danger and will release the hormone cortisol. Okay, that's also known as the stress hormone. Okay, and cortisol wreaks havoc on our nervous systems and our bodies at large. So when we think, I don't have enough, I'm scraping by, okay, this may be your reality, yes, okay? But if you're in that scarcity mindset, you're not doing yourself any favors, okay? But if we reframe it as, I'm creating resilience, right? Then we activate agency, right? We have some control. And what releases then? Not cortisol, but dopamine. Okay. And dopamine is a motivating messenger chemical in our brain. Okay. So you're not denying the reality that you're in. Okay. You're just reframing it in a way that your nervous system can relax into it and not create a stressful internal environment that prevents you from thinking clearly. Okay. Again, I'm not trying to say toxic positivity or anything like that. We're going to be realistic, and we can say I'm creating resilience as in I've made it through every day up until today, and I've eaten, right? Hopefully you've eaten every day, right? There's ways to go about it without beating ourselves up over it over and over and over again, right? So that scarcity mindset, it really does keep our nervous systems in survival mode, okay? And when we are in survival mode, we have a more difficult time strategizing, okay? So you're gonna find yourself more often in that loop than you'd like to be, okay? But when we think of it from scarcity to stewardship, right? Um, it reminds us that we're resourceful, right? We're creative caretakers. We're doing well with what we have, even if what we have isn't as much as we'd like for it to be, right? So one approach, scarcity, drains the nervous system, and the other one restores. Okay. So maybe there is a time where you made something good from almost nothing, right? That could be food, right? Maybe you made like a really cool soup or a casserole. Maybe it was a story, right? Or just a precious moment that was able to be experienced with you and your loved one, right? This is stewardship at work, right? We're taking what we have and we're putting it to good use and we're making the most of it. So I'll tell you a story from my childhood. So I am one of five, and of five children in my family. And we grew up incredibly poor, right? We grew up using state benefits. There were times where my parents were employed for a while. And so we really relied heavily on creativity in the kitchen. And so my mom would always make soup. And I remember being little, and when she would say, we're making soup, she would call it, boy, are we poor soup, right? But when my little brain, all I heard was one word, boy, you're weeper. Okay. It's not a real word, but that's what I heard. And it wasn't until I was in my 20s when I asked my mom how she made boyer weeper soup, she looked at me like I was insane. Like, what are you talking about? And then after having a conversation with her, we realized that no, she was saying, boy, are we poor soup. But in my head, as a little kid, that was my favorite meal, right? So she's stressing, how do I feed five children with, two chicken legs and a bag of carrots? And in my little kid brain, I was excited, right? This was the taste of home to me. This was the taste of love to me. And so I didn't see the lack that my mother saw, right? So what was a stressful time for her was a cherished moment for me. And so I tell you that story because I know oftentimes as caregivers, as parents, as loved ones, we are very prone to thinking about what we're not doing well, what we're not doing right, what we could be doing better. But that perception may not be what everybody else sees, right? Your loved one may not see, oh, we're having hot dogs and macaroni and cheese. They're seeing, wow, somebody thought enough about me to prepare this meal, and I'm enjoying the community. I'm enjoying having this meal with somebody that cares about me, right? So perspective makes a huge difference. Your mindset can make a huge difference. It doesn't change the reality that we're in necessarily, but it tells a different story to our nervous system, okay? Which is how we maintain the quality of care we want to give, right? So a few strategies, okay? Some of you are old hats and you know exactly how to make your dollar stretch, okay? And I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in this at all. Some of these tricks may be things that you already do. They might not be for you either, but these are just a few things to keep in mind as we move through uncertain times, okay? So think of your pantry as like a savings account for your energy, right? The goal is efficiency, not self-denial or austerity, okay? So we can use things like overlapping ingredients, right? So using the same base grain or protein in two different meals, right? This not only helps prevent waste, but it also helps with decision fatigue. And you guys probably know exactly what that is. But it's just where you are the one making decisions in your home for everyone and everything, that coming up with new meals every day is just one more thing you have to decide on, and it's incredibly exhausting after a while, right? It gets old real fast. Okay. But if you do overlapping ingredients, then you don't have to think as much, right? It makes it a little bit easier. So foods like beans, oats, rice, eggs, okay, these are very nutrient rich or nutrient dense components that can help you save money while still being able to feed yourself and your loved ones, right? You're not starving yourselves because you're not able to fill your belly, right? I'll tell you, I became a casserole queen. Okay. I have always had a tight budget. Okay. Always. And so I found ways to just really incorporate the same ingredients in different ways. And casseroles are one of the ways that I feed a family of seven on a very slim budget. And I know, you get into those health guru sites and they're like, well, pasta's bad for you, or, doing too much rice. And they tell you these things you're not supposed to eat. And that all may be good and well. But not everybody's out here trying to be, Mr. Universe or Miss America. Some of us are just trying to eat. Okay. So getting you a bag of rice and some canned beans is not a sin. Okay. You're not going to, your body will be okay if you have these things. Okay. So let's see here. You can also use plant and animal proteins, right? Obviously. I have actually discovered lentils over the last couple of months. Lentils are high in fiber and they are a plant-based protein and they're incredibly cheap. If you put some lentils and some broth in an Instant Pot and some seasonings, I mean, that's all you need, right? Well, maybe not all you need, but it definitely fills you up and it's very, very good for you, okay? And then, of course, rotating your food storage, right? We want to use the oldest things first. And sometimes, I don't know about you, but like if you just go through your pantry and what you have, see what you have to use before you go to the grocery store. That's a great way to save money. I know for me, every time I go to the grocery store, I pick up a can of beans or a can of, diced tomatoes or something because I can always throw it into something else. I know my kids love tacos, okay, and I'm not authentic tacos. I mean, I'm an old El Paso gal all the way, right? Open up a can, I'm good to go. But protein, right? Getting ground beef or ground turkey even can be pretty expensive when you're trying to feed a lot of people. And so what I started doing was adding like black beans in with my ground beef, and that adds protein and it allows it to stretch, okay? Because a can of beans is a lot cheaper than a pound of beef. And it doesn't taste weird because a lot of times they put beans in Mexican food, right? So it's not like some weird out of place ingredient, right? It's still, the flavors still flow. And a lot of times people, you get on Pinterest and you get these, recipes and it's like 14 ingredients and oh, it's so easy, but it's not. Something simple like just adding a can of beans or adding a bag of, frozen vegetables to something can really help add nutrients and fill bellies and be a lot more cost effective than some of these other, gourmet type things we find online. And so every time we cook from our pantry instead of impulse buying at the grocery store, which we all know are set up to sabotage our budgets, right? We're choosing calm over chaos, right? I think the theme here is that I really want to press home is you can do just, you can do well with what you have, okay? You don't have to add anything extra, okay? Just keeping that mindset, I'm choosing calm over chaos in the kitchen can go a long way keeping your stress levels down. Oh, I forgot to ask you your prompt. What's one inexpensive ingredient that always saves you? So I've already told you mine, it's beans. Beans on beans on beans. Of course, you can answer in the chat or you can just think to yourself, what's one ingredient that always saves you that if you have that in your pantry, you're good to go, right? Rice, that's another one. And of course, you don't always have to use the white rice if you're more health conscious. Brown rice, mixed rice, wild grain, those are all good for you, okay? So how do we add flavor? Okay, because that's the big component. It's not necessarily about how are we fueling our bodies, but does it taste good, right? We don't want to eat, gruel and crust of bread all day. We don't want we don't want to sacrifice flavor because we have to tighten our budget a little bit, right? But flavor is medicine, right? Herbs and spices are a good way to alter our mood chemistry, okay? Using things like garlic and citrus actually stimulate the vagus nerve, okay? And the vagus nerve calms our stress response, okay? And it improves our digestion. So that's a good double whammy there, right? And then vinegar or lemon can brighten an entire dish for pennies. So I know for me, if I buy a couple lemons, they're maybe like 70 cents a piece and I just squeeze some of that onto, maybe like a rice casserole or something that I'm making, or even just like on some chicken, right? And it just kind of gives it a nice little bump, a little brightness. And that feels good, right? That lifts my mood. It makes me happy to eat it, even though I didn't spend a whole lot of extra money, okay? So if you have a spice blend that you love, keep it with you, right? Use that in everything. This is going to kind of lay the groundwork of almost like a signature scent, right? Something that when you walk in and you smell it cooking or what have you, you're like, this smells like home, right? And that triggers to your nervous system to go ahead and start relaxing, right? Start pulling some of that armor off a little bit because now you're home, right? So for me, I always use garlic in everything. And I use a lot of herbs like rosemary or basil, right? And just smelling it out of the jar is very relaxing to me. And so in those times where I'm feeling very stressed and I don't really want to be in the kitchen, focusing on the sensory output that I enjoy makes the whole process a lot easier for me, right? So I love the smell of basil. So if I'm cooking and I use it, it definitely does boost my mood a little bit. And so I'm not, begrudgingly in the kitchen, right? So again, this is about adding a little bit extra to the dish for flavor, for scent, and that adds a little bit of a boost to our nervous system, and it can help lift our moods, okay? Even when things are tight. So what about comfort food? Okay, there's a reason why it's called comfort food, okay? It actually impacts our biology, right? It actually changes our brain chemistry, okay? So things like carbs, they raise your serotonin, okay? So that's why if you're stressed out and you eat mashed potatoes, you probably feel a little bit better, right? Because that serotonin, that chemical in our brain that signals contentment, okay? That's what serotonin is. Carbs boost that for us, okay? Now, this could also be why when you're stressed out, you just zone out on your social media and eat a whole bag of Cheetos, okay? So we have to be mindful, obviously, but we definitely can use comfort foods to our advantage, okay? So complex carbohydrates, they boost serotonin, and that helps to steady our mood. Proteins, they provide something called tryptophan, and tryptophan is what we actually use to build serotonin. Okay, so that's why when you have a Thanksgiving meal and it's full of stuffing and potatoes and turkey, okay, you feel good because your brain is releasing these feel good chemicals. Okay, warm textures and familiar flavors activate the parasympathetic nervous system, and that is our internal signal for safety. Okay, so knowing this, you can kind of start looking at a lot of our traditional holiday meals and see why they kind of give us that warm and fuzzy feeling, right? Because it's literally signaling to our body, it's affecting our chemistry and enacting some of those maybe more wholesome nostalgic memories, right? And so that's a very potent combination for well-being and peace, right? And so things like soup or toast or mashed potatoes, right? Those can feel kind of relieving, right? Because it's combining again that chemistry and the memory, okay? And that nourishment can be very reassuring to our bodies, right? Our nervous system is saying, yes, we're safe, right? This is good. But we also have to make sure that we are portioning for comfort that heals and not numbing ourselves, right? So I'm not advocating that everybody goes out and just indulges in all the foods that make them feel good. I'm saying you can use these components in your everyday cooking and provide mind, body, and soul nourishment from a biochemical standpoint, okay? So here's another prompt for you to think about. Which comfort meal feels like home for you? Okay. So mine's always going to be soup and biscuits. It's always going to be that for me, right? Because it's wholesome, right? It's nourishing, and it's something from my childhood that I remember, right? So there's a lot at play when it comes to food that we might not even be aware of. Hot soup and cornbread. Now you're speaking my language, Linda. Yes. All right, so we're going to get a little bit more into the sensory component of nourishment, okay? We can cook in robot mode, right? Where we're just kind of on autopilot, chopping, sauteing, boiling, frying, whatever it is we're doing, baking, okay? Or we can create kind of like a ritual out of it, right? And I'm not saying from like a religious or spiritual component or perspective, okay? But from a nervous system perspective, all right? So being aware of your sensory input during cooking, that's mindfulness, okay? And I've talked about mindfulness a million times over the last couple of years, but I'm sure you guys have seen it, heard it elsewhere. But really just focusing on those sensory inputs, that is mindfulness, okay? So you might not have time to sit and meditate, but you can use cooking as a moment of mindfulness and get the same impact on your nervous system. Okay, so what does that mean? Cooking with awareness, it feeds more than your hunger, it grounds the mind. Okay, so engaging in sight, scent, sound, okay, that pulls the brain into the present moment, and that lowers that stress hormone cortisol, right? And it helps to reestablish a natural rhythm in our body, right? So even just stirring something slowly or listening for a sizzle, right? That's mindfulness. Okay, so we notice scent, sound, and color that cues our body to calm down. We're not all up in our head anymore, right? We're using this everyday thing that we do as a ritual to ground ourselves into our bodies. Okay. And so that is helpful because again, we end up getting dopamine and serotonin, which keeps us our moods elevated and stabilized, rather than cortisol, which keeps us stressed and in survival mode. Okay. So you can engage loved ones too, right? They can be taste testers, they can help you stir or chop if it's appropriate, or even just storytelling, right? Just sitting in the kitchen and having a conversation with maybe a loved one who used to do all the cooking and now they can't anymore, right? Maybe just have those moments to kind of reminisce and get their perspective and have that storytelling can be very healing for both of you, right? So maybe one meal a week, right? Doesn't have to be everything, but maybe just be intentional with one meal a week, right? And create a tiny ritual, like maybe, light a candle on the table, right? Um, Play some music, right? I listen to music all the time. It makes everything so much more fun. Breathing in the smell of what you made, right? And letting those sensory inputs trigger moments of nostalgia and peace and comfort and home, right? Even if it's just for 5 minutes, maybe just invite somebody to join you, right, in the kitchen. Um, so sensory attention is nutrients for our nervous system. Okay, it tells us the nervous system that you're here, you're in this body, you're safe. Okay, it's not just about making a meal because you're hungry and you have to get it done. Okay, you can really, with the right mindset, make this into part of your wellness, right? Part of your mindfulness practice. And you're not doing anything different. It's just how are you showing up in that space, right? So I've talked a little bit in the past on different trainings about an emotional budget, right? Or like an energy budget, okay? Because we are not a finite resource when it comes to energy and emotion. And so we do have to be mindful with how we spend our emotional currency, right? So again, decision fatigue, it's one of the most under discussed costs of caregiving, right? Um, the brain's planning center is our prefrontal cortex, right? And this gets really tired after constant problem solving. And what is caregiving if it's not constant problem solving, right? And so cooking can be just another decision at the end of the day that's full of other decisions. And so we can really expend a lot of our emotional budget at the end of the day just in preparing meals for people, right? And so we want to kind of focus on how we can spend our emotion budget wisely, okay? So we can simplify our meals, okay? And when we simplify our meal, I'm not saying to cut anything as far as like I'm not saying like we'll only serve rice, right, and nothing else, right? Unless that's what you want to eat. I'm not going to judge you. Um, and it's not about being lazy. Okay, a lot of times people think, well, I don't want to use prepackaged things, or I don't want to use frozen vegetables, or I don't want to use cans because I feel like I'm not doing it properly, right? I'm not working hard enough. Okay, we often have these invisible, unnecessary standards that we set for ourselves. Okay. What we're talking about is simplifying for neural conservation, right? We've already put so much energy into our day that when we simplify our meals, it's really just an act of self-care, okay? It's an act of self-compassion, okay? So what does that look like? Sandwiches for dinner, right? We do that all the time at my house. It's cheap, everybody's happy, You know, sometimes we'll make them hot in the oven, sometimes we won't, right? But there's nothing that's gonna make a sandwich taste different at 6 o'clock at night than it would at noon for lunch, right? So we have all these cultural rules or expectations that, you don't have to adhere to those, right? Another thing that we love to do is breakfast for dinner. My kids love that, right? And it's easy. I can just fry some eggs, maybe a couple pancakes, and they're happy and they're fed and they're getting, I mean, of course, pancakes aren't super healthy, but eggs are, right? You can add some fruit in there or what have you. So we can be flexible, right? We don't have to say, well, that's just for this time of day and that's just for that time of day. If you get home or if you've had a long day and all you can muster is some scrambled eggs in a jar or a container of yogurt, great. You've got calcium, you've got vitamin D, you've got protein, you've got what you need to nourish your body, but you're not adding all that extra stress of creating a bigger, more elaborate meal, right? So it's not laziness, it's self-preservation, okay? And they're practical strategies for protecting the bandwidth that we have, right? We only have so much energy and emotional bandwidth that we have to be able to give ourselves some grace every once in a while, right? Perfectionism is a very costly behavior, okay? Um, so a calm, simple meal eaten without guilt is going to nourish your body, mind, and soul way more than a gourmet meal eaten in stress, right? Um, you don't need to add any more stress to your body and to your mind um, unnecessarily, right? So we want to avoid all or nothing thinking, right? Where it's like, if I don't do it this way, I might as well not do it at all. Okay. That can be sustainable for a while, but as your journey progresses, as your loved one's needs progress, you cannot be in that space for too long and be productive, right? Guilt is a huge energy waster. Okay. It is huge. And I think we torture ourselves with guilt more so than anything else, right? We always kind of think about thinking ahead and thinking behind, and we stay out of the present moment, and guilt will pull you out of that present moment more than anything else. Okay. And we can also just think as of each meal as an act of replenishment, right? Food is fuel. So as long as you're putting gas in the tank, it doesn't have to be, a 6-course meal. It doesn't have to be biscuits from scratch. Okay. It can be whatever you have and it'll be good enough. Okay. It'll be good enough. Next, we can talk about community nourishment. Okay. So I know one thing that we often really focus on during the holiday season is gathering, right? Gathering together. Some of us probably don't do it as much as we used to because of the situation we're in, and that's okay. But there is something to be said about sharing a meal with a loved one, even if it's just one person, or even sharing food within the community, right? And it doesn't have to be because of lack, right? It could be because there is more to nourishment than what we put on our bodies, okay? So shared cooking can reduce costs and it also can reduce loneliness, right? So I know I had a group of ladies that I was in a homeschool co-op group with, and we did recipe swaps. We did freezer meal exchanges. We did potlucks, okay, where we just made one meal, but everybody got a portion of it. And so, we'd meet up, and then by the end of it, everybody had like 5 meals but only had to cook one, right? Because everybody shared. And that was great because it reduced a lot of stress for me that week because then I had my meals planned out, right? Um, so eating with others isn't just social, right? It's biological, right? Shared meals raise our oxytocin, which is our love chemical, right? It lowers our heart rate and it can calm the body's alarm system. So even if you're not having conversation, if you're just sharing a meal with somebody, that co-regulation happens naturally, okay? So maybe you're in a situation now where you eat in one room and your loved one eats in another room, or you prepare a meal for your loved one and they sit and eat it by themselves while you run off and do laundry, right? And those things need to be done, obviously. But maybe just be mindful. Say, maybe I'll sit in the room with this person and we'll have a meal together. because it's good for my nervous system to do it, right? It's going to reduce my stress if I do it. And it doesn't have to be, a big gathering, right? It can just be one-on-one. But these are just little gestures that stretch our food and our belonging at once, right? Maybe you made a big pot of soup and you're going to share it with your neighbor, right? Just something to think about. Some practical things, though, besides sharing recipes or food swaps with your friends. A lot of us are in spaces where there are local food pantries, right? There are senior centers, there are garden co-ops that we can use resources to supplement what we're already doing. Now, of course, I know if you're in a more rural space, you probably don't have as much as we do here in Huntsville, but I know I can't remember the name of the college that's up here, but there's a college up here and they have gardens and they harvest all that food and they have a local co-op and they just give it away to the community. It's grant funded by the state or by the college. And so there's resources in that capacity, right? We can get turnip greens and yams and all these things, right? But there are also a lot of food pantries, right? Some people think, well, I don't want to take from somebody who's, maybe in more need than I am. And I think that's fair. But I also think that sometimes we struggle more than we have to, right? Because we feel guilty or we feel bad. Like, oh, I'd rather go without than have somebody else go without. But I can guarantee you, if you go there and you need to get food, no one's going to judge you for it. No one's going to, ask for proof of, what you got in your pantry already. Okay. It's available. It's a community resource. Okay. Let's see here. And then when we connect with food and community, that helps with our emotional regulation as well. Okay. All right, so some tips for holiday and hard times. Okay, so this is where I think we really shoot ourselves in the foot, right? We think the holidays are non-negotiable, right? We have to do these things because we've always done it this way, right? And traditions can be fun, right? They can be beautiful things, but sometimes they need to be made over a little bit, right? Sometimes they need to rework. Sometimes they need to be simplified. And so this slide is really to try to get you thinking about, why do our traditions exist in the first place, right? What is the core behind this tradition and how can we maintain the core even if the activity shifts a little bit, right? So you can have like an anchor dish, right? So let's just use an easy one. For Thanksgiving, everybody knows turkey's on the menu, right? So that can be something that you don't change, okay? But everything else maybe can change, right? Maybe you don't need to make that, that dressing from scratch with your 8 loaves of, freshly made bread, right? Maybe you don't need to go out and harvest cranberries yourself in order to press them into some kind of cranberry sauce, right? You can still have the nourishment and the community of the tradition without killing yourself getting it done, right? So we're really talking about presence and not performance, right? And holidays can amplify scarcity, right? We're thinking about, okay, I've got to make all this food for people. I've got to have all these gifts prepared. I have to buy a Christmas tree. I have to travel, right? And then that starts to kind of give us that idea like, oh, I don't know if I have all the resources, financial or emotional or time to do all these things. And so they start focusing on what we don't have, okay? Which is kind of a paradox when you think, okay, this is the season of giving and thanks, and here we are stressed out about lack, right? And fear. So it's kind of counter to what the whole point is, right? So the goal isn't abundance, okay? It's enoughness. Okay, traditions and holidays can still take place without it being an extravagant to do like maybe your mother or grandmother was able to do, right? So choose one anchor dish that tastes like love and let the rest of it go, okay? So familiar smells activate the brain's memory and reward centers, and it gives continuity even when our circumstances shift, okay? So we can redefine our celebrations as presence focused, not performance focused, right? Gratitude, warmth, simplicity, these all feed the same chemistry as a huge lavish spread, okay? And if you think about it, your traditions and these time of years more about the chemistry that takes place in your body, then it makes it a little easier to shift out of tradition, right? Because the goal is warmth, community, and gratitude. You don't need all these extra things to get there. Okay. You can have your hot soup and cornbread and be good to go. Okay. Can't tell you how many times Thanksgiving has come and gone, and I did not miss all the extra work I decided not to put in there. Okay. My Thanksgivings are very simple now. Most of the time, we don't even do turkey, right? That's just me. So we don't want to exhaust ourselves when we're already under a lot of stress because of financial strain or time constraints, right? By making it seem that this, if I don't do it this way, we're ruining the whole, holiday. Okay, that's not true. You can always simplify your traditions. Okay. So here's one way to even start, right? If you kept only one tradition, what would that be? Right? Is it the food? Is it the community? Is it, maybe the games you play with your family when they're coming over, right? Those are the memories. The food's great, I'm sure, but that's not why we gather, right? We gather because we love the people we're gathering with. And I'm sure we've all seen the Charlie Brown Thanksgiving or whatever, where they had burnt toast and jelly beans and they had a great time, right? So just think about that, just your mindset, right? Flipping it from scarcity to stewardship, right? We can still have the things that make these moments meaningful without all the extra to do and the hullabaloo that make us stressed out, right? So a closing reflection, okay? Feeding others is love, and feeding yourself is survival, and they both matter, okay? And when I say survival, I'm not talking about life or death. I'm talking about peace versus discord, right? I'm talking about a mindset of maintaining a homeostasis within yourself, right? So that you can focus on the point of these times of the year, right? The gratitude, the community, the love, right? The shared experiences, the memory making, okay? It doesn't have to be about the expense or the extravagance that you put into it, right? It's just about coming back home to yourself and coming back home to what really matters, okay? That's what makes this time of year magical, not the homemade cranberry sauce that took you 19 years to perfect, okay? Which I'm sure it's amazing, but if you have to let it go, it's okay to let it go, okay? So here's another prompt for you. What is one meal this week that can nourish your body and your spirit? Just try it out, right? What's something that you can do that isn't about the presentation or the flourish or the I need to do it this way because I've always done it this way? But what is it nourishing outside of the body, your soul, your mind, your spirit, right? Think of it that way. And I'm sure you'll come with all kinds of creative solutions that'll make you feel a lot more peaceful, a lot more grounded, much more capable than you probably thought was possible. That's my info for you today. Let me go ahead and stop the recording. Maybe. Here we go.